All right, so welcome to the 18th episode, I believe, of the Dead Soon podcast. I have another interview today, which I'm very excited about. This one I think is the longest one coming of like kind of what I imagined. And yeah, so I have Joanna D'Avanzo, my professor. So if you want to introduce yourself, who you are, and maybe how I know you also.
Sure. And the longest one. So this is going to be your longest podcast?
Well, longest like anticipated in my mind.
I see. Okay.
That's what I was like. When I was imagining interviewing professors, I was like, I mean, obviously.
Right. All right. So I'm Joanna D'Avanzo. I am a senior professional lecturer at Marist University now.
Yep, university.
No longer Marist College. And I've been here for about 10 years. I teach advertising classes and really the creative side of advertising. I am also the global coordinator. Oh, not a global. Well, I guess it is a global coordinator. I'm the faculty coordinator for our global marketing communication degree over at our Florence campus, which is really nice because I get to, work with that campus and travel there and work with students there as well as our students here in Poughkeepsie. And how do I know you, Trevor? So I remember when I first met Trevor, he came into my office. He had just switched to communication and advertising, and I was his advisor. And he came in, and I was just so thoroughly impressed that he was so together and had everything planned out, because many times students aren't like that. But he had it all worked out, and ever since then, whenever it's time to do advising, Trevor is always my first email,
Yep.
the first advisee to email me and get on my schedule. And so that's how we met. And you've been in lots of my classes since then, and it's been great. I'll miss you when you're gone.
Yeah, it's crazy that this is the last semester that I won't have you in a class again. Pretty crazy.
And wait, when did you come? So was that like, were you already a sophomore, or was it second semester freshman year?
It was second semester my freshman
year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if I remember correctly, we came in and we were probably there for at least an hour because I kind of made you plan out my entire 4 years of college in that meeting, because anyone listening to this knows me well enough to know that I like to plan and I like to be prepared. So yeah, I was literally going to ask you like about that first meeting just because I think it was foundational for me in college, because I think after my first semester, I kind of was like, I hate this and I'm not liking it, and I didn't really like my classes at all. And so I had kind of decided that I was going to explore, like I went through every possible major and I kind of just like noted the like 4 that I was considering, and I kind of like was trying to just set up meetings with all the the chairs of each one, or just like
because I was department chair at the time.
So that
right.
was like the universe like was perfectly aligned,
right.
Because I think you were the first one that I had met with, because the other ones just kind of didn't answer their emails or whatever.
Right.
And so I showed up, and because I don't even think I had technically switched into comm yet. I think I was unsure, and I was like, I'm thinking about it, like if you could like kind of help me potentially decide. And I left that meeting decided. Good. With also my full 4 years. I don't know if I still have that paper, but I do. I know I have it somewhere. Of literally, it's just a full blank piece of paper with every single semester mapped out. Mm-hmm. And I've probably been pretty close to what it was.
Well, that's good to hear.
If I look back,
a lot of times, faculty want students to do that on their own, but I always work with students and do their 4-year plans. I just feel that it's kind of reassuring. I think it's incredibly confusing to do it on your own. And, I just that's always been my approach. And I've done that just when I was, as just a faculty member, but also when I was department chair, I would work with students to do that too. But I always do that with my advisees. I just, I don't feel that it's, I'm babying anyone in doing that. I'm just having that whole conversation, and having them, making them feel comfortable about it all. Because I think, it's a lot to not understand any of that. But the other thing I remember too is saying to you, again, I felt that you just had everything so together and so many good questions. And I have 3 sons, And I just didn't, I hope my sons are not going to be listening to this, but I just didn't ever see them being that together. And I was like, why are you so together? And you said, well, I have a brother, but he's not as together.
Yeah. Well, like, he didn't go to school, so I didn't have that, like, I didn't have that experience. So I was, like, going in and I was like, he didn't go to college at all, and he didn't really enjoy school. So I was, like, kind of in the dark, kind of blind in that way of, like, yeah, I mean, and going back to, like, the advising thing, like, I had heard so many horror stories, and I still do, of people who, like, even their advisors that they've had for 4 years, like, they'll go to the meeting and the advisor will not help them, or they'll just have to, the advisor will be like, oh, just email me the classes and I'll write it off. Like, I always have been like, I need to be able to meet and understand everything, and I want to have every question answered. And it's unfortunate that so many people, like, even my first semester when I came in, when I had, like, whatever you have, like, a freshman year, like, advisor or whatever, like, my business advisor or whatever, I was not getting any help, and I really needed the help, because obviously it's nerve-wracking, and it's like you're expected to make a decision about your entire life when you're 18,
right? Which
is obviously not realistic, and it's why people end up switching majors. So yeah, I mean, it was I definitely got lucky that, like, you were the one that answered the email, and it was you who happened to be the department chair, and, like, everything was perfect in that situation.
Well, and I'm a big proponent too of having an advisor early on that's in your discipline, because I think that's really important to be able to. I mean, I can understand it from, like, maybe like freshman year, maybe having a more general advisor, but I do really like getting to know my students as freshmen and seeing them all the way through. I think it creates a really great relationship between, me and the advisee, as well as just advice for those 4 years. I mean, I think that's just that. I understand that you come in, you're 18 years old. It's like, what the hell am I doing here? Like, what, I have to make this decision really for the rest of my life. And if you don't have that information early on, if you're not able to discuss that, it could be, I don't want to say detrimental to the student, but I also realize that students are paying so much money for school, whether students paying it or parents paying it, or you work so hard that, you got a scholarship, somewhere along the line has put in the time and effort for the student to be able to go to college. So I just think, for me, it's all about how to make that a really worthwhile experience, and that's kind of what I've done. And I remember you said to me too, I was like, why are you so together? And you're like, well, my mom, was like that. And I was like, well, I'm like that. And I don't think my kids are going to be like that. So kudos to your mom though too.
Yes, she definitely has made me, I see more and more how similar I am to her, which can be scary at times, but I definitely got the good part of, like, being prepared, and it's like, I can't not be. Like, it's very, like, I have to always be ready. And I mean, I think, like, what you said is important. It's like, it's high stakes when you're going to school. Like, there's even if it's money, whether it's, like, I don't know, your family's expectations. Like, to me, it was like, there's expectations, and even just put on myself. Like, my parents weren't, like, pressuring me to go into any direction. So it was obviously great that they weren't like, oh, you have to do this or you have to do this, but it's also like, then I have the whole world in front of me, so I can do whatever. So I really wanted to make sure that I was deciding and making a good decision.
Do you feel like you made a good decision?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm so lucky that even just going to Marist, I think, has been a great decision. I think looking back 4 years, I was talking to my friend about this yesterday, just like that I feel like I've changed over these 4 years for the better, and I've kind of, like, came out of my shell more, which I think is important, and I'm glad. So even if, like, I mean, I got the academic side, but then I also feel like the personal and social side, and met my girlfriend too, so, like, everything feel like has gone so well. But it is crazy that this is the last semester of it.
I know.
Definitely strange.
It goes by fast, I know.
Yeah.
I'm always sad when my students, graduate and stuff, but gosh, I keep in contact with so many of them.
Yeah.
They text me all the time, or, do you remember Skylar Ransom?
No.
she just texted me yesterday about a job that she just got. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you get a lot of updates, and I'm sure
I get a lot of
it's
them.
exciting to see people succeeding.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's a good transition into my first question, which is sort of walking me through your sort of career journey, and you don't have to get super into the weeds with anything, but so you graduated from FIT.
I did.
What does life look like kind of after that, and what does your career kind of turn into?
So I graduated from FIT with a full-time job. So I graduated on a Friday and I started work on a Monday. And that happened because at the time at FIT, one of our classes was taught by a creative director who at the time was working at McCann. And he had said to us in the class, I'm going to hire 2 of you to intern for me over the summer. And I was one of them and one other person. And so I interned for him over the summer, unpaid. But I still worked for my dad at his pharmacy. You said not to get into the weeds, but I have a hard time not doing that.
I feel a little bit. I get
it. And then I actually went abroad after that. So I did a study abroad in London, and then I came back, and he said to me, when you come back from London, come speak to me. So I did, and he said, so I am leaving McCann. Well, actually, now he was at J. Walter Thompson. He was at McCann when I did the internship. Now he was at J. Walter. And then he's like, I'm leaving J. Walter, and I am going to DMB&B, which doesn't exist anymore, but neither does J. Walter, which is just so sad. All these agencies just getting bought up and turning into one big conglomerate. And he said, I'm going to DMB&B to be the executive creative director of Burger King. And I want you to come and be my assistant art director. And I was like, okay. So that's what I did. So like I said, I graduated on a Friday. And on that Monday, I went to work at DMB&B on 52nd and Broadway, right down the block from David Letterman. That was my first job. And it was, so Burger King at the time was at DMB&B, and it was a $250 million account. Now, the way advertising was back then and how accounts, how much money an account was worth is very different than like the structure it is now. But it was a really large account. He was in there as executive creative director, and I went in and as he said to his entire group, she's an assistant art director in the group, but she's my assistant art director. So no one can use her but me. And we basically started a new campaign at the time. And it was called BK. It was BKTV. BKTV. I love this place. And I'm singing it because that was the little, we had this little song thing going on there. And it was a giant campaign, and we did, like 50 commercials a year, just a ton of commercials, a lot of work in editorial at the end of it. And at the time, MTV had this show called MTV Sports, and the host of it was this guy named Dan Cortez, and he was like the main star of the campaign. And we went to Burger Kings all across the United States and shot in every single one of them, because the way Burger King was set up, like, so, with any of the fast foods, you have like franchise owners, and you have they're either franchise owned or corporate owned. And Burger King was much more franchise owned than corporate owned, and McDonald's is the opposite way. So we went to any Burger King franchise owner who was not happy with things, and we shot our commercials in their stores. And it was, it was basically like, kind of like man on the street, interviewing, talking to customers who were there. Lots of graphics, lots of stuff going on in editorial. But we traveled the country like on a private plane, shooting from place to place, because we had maybe a crew of like 15 people. We got the entire crew from MTV Sports, the MTV Sports show, and they were with us. And it was, like I said, it was cheaper to go on these private planes than to try and get, 15 to 20 people from all these different airports. And I just worked my ass off really for those couple of years that we did that. But it was a really, really wonderful learning experience because it's very unusual to come into advertising and to go onto such a large campaign and get so much production experience and all that. But my boss was great. He gave me every opportunity that I had, and I always have to go back and thank him for everything. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know how quickly you went into it, so you kind of dove into it and got a ton of experience right away. Mm-hmm. What does the progression kind of look like? Like, how long are you there, and what different accounts did you work on?
So I was there for, gosh, you're making me think of all these years. I was probably at D&B for about 5 years, but what had happened was maybe after about 2 or 3 years, we ended up, we lost Burger King as an account. Most people who worked on it got fired, especially people at the top because they were making the most money. But at that time, my partner and I we were still on the lower level, so we did not get let go. So we stayed at D&B. And at that point, then I went to work. But in this particular group that I was in, I worked on Burger King. We pitched IBM Latin America. I remember we worked on that. We worked on a bunch of different. There were maybe a couple other accounts that we worked on with in this particular group, and under my boss Pat Peduto at the time. Once they all left, I stayed, and I went into another group and basically started working on a lot of more consumer packaged goods. So we had Kraft was a big one of our clients. P&G was another big client at D&B. So under Kraft, I worked on things like Bobley and Entenmann's. P&G, I worked on Charmin toilet paper. I have to try and remember all these things. But basically, like I said, mostly consumer packaged goods. Oh, Freihofer's I worked on there. That was actually super fun. I really enjoyed working on that. And then I started working with different my partner that I originally had, she kind of left advertising at the time. I think she had her first kid. So then I stayed there for a couple of years. And then, what made me leave there? Oh, jeez. I don't even, what did make me leave there? Maybe more money. I wanted to, want to make more money. Usually the way you make more money is you go to another agency. So at that point, then I went to J. Walter Thompson to work on Clairol and Kellogg's. I think Joe Walter was super fun, but nonstop work. You were there all the time, just all the time. Mm-hmm. And then, so maybe I was at J. Walter for about 2 years. I worked for some really big advertising people like Helene Spivak, who, J.J. Jordan, Todd Sizer, who, and Helene is a legendary advertising person, and she was wonderful to work for. But then I got tired of being there 24/7. And then I went to Gray, an old boss of mine. So one of my bosses that was at D&B, he was at Gray. And then I called him, ended up there, and I stayed there for about 10 years. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so after that moving around, where was the transition into teaching? Where does that play in?
So I ended up quitting my job at Gray, or ending my job at Gray, because at this point now I was married, I had 3 kids. I just found out that my dad was my third son was just born. My dad ended up found out my dad was sick. And it was just a lot. I was still working a lot of hours. But I did have a really wonderful boss at Gray. And it was unheard of in advertising at the time. There was no like hybrid working. There was none of that existed. But he was really great and gave me a lot of flexibility because he just knew that I would always get my work done. But I was at the point that I just didn't, I had 3 kids under the age of 4.
That's a lot to balance.
Yeah, I wanted to be with them. So I, was home and I was doing some freelance stuff. And then I just, got really involved in like things with my kids and like, designing, like yearbooks, just all sorts of stuff. They just tried to keep my creative passion of anything going. And then I got a phone call from an old professor of mine from FIT who wanted to know if I would teach. And she was heading up she was the online director for the Academy of Art University in San Francisco. And she was looking for people to teach. So I was like, okay, it was 100% online. And, throughout my career, whenever, we have like a lot of high schools come in for like, to have a conversation about what advertising's about. So I would always go and do that. It was just, something I always enjoyed doing and speaking to students and trying to, see what their passions are and just trying to get people to understand exactly like what this kind of a career is, because a lot of people, if you say that you're an advertising, you're an art director or a creative director, people just don't know what you do. Mm-hmm. And it was a career that had been so rewarding for me. So that's how I started teaching. I probably did that for quite a few years. I don't even remember, maybe 4 or 5 years, maybe longer than that. And then, as my kids got older and I really didn't need to be home, I was like, well, why don't I just kind of do this full time now? And one thing led to another. I started looking to see what kind of jobs were open, because the specific type of job that I'm doing, there aren't that many opportunities to go into an academic institution coming from the professional side, and be able to teach the creative side of advertising. There aren't so many of those opportunities, especially sometimes, they might want you to have a PhD, but that's unheard of in the industry.
Yeah.
Especially for a creative, like that just doesn't happen. So this job, I saw it, and actually I first interviewed for a job at FIT and I didn't get it. And then this one came up and I got it.
So that's just interesting to think of. I was like thinking about like all the different like possibilities there are. Like if that little change had occurred, like so many things would be different.
Yeah, 100%.
Just thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess diving into what I think is like gonna be like the main theme and goal of the episode, because I know when I tell people I am pursuing advertising or I like worked at an advertising agency, like I don't think people really understand much of it, and I think a lot of it is maybe just like people have seen like Mad Men or something, and they kind of just build their perception off of that, or just are just like think marketing and advertising are all fall under the same thing. So I think my big goal here is kind of explaining the structure of an advertising agency for viewers. And I know you are the best person to explain this. So if we're talking about a creative advertising agency, big picture, what is a creative agency providing to the client, and the client being brands and
so and over the years, I think agencies have changed so much. Like some places don't even want to call themselves advertising agencies anymore because they're not just only doing advertising anymore. And I think the lines have blurred also between who's creating what. Sometimes, a lot of brands are doing a lot of stuff on their own in-house. But so if we're talking about more traditional or typical, an agency will provide to a client, yes, it will provide advertising to them and create advertising for them. They could also be providing, but it's also more of like a strategic goal, right? Working with them, clients have some sort of business problem, right? And agencies have to sort of figure out, how do we solve whatever problem that is? Maybe the problem isn't always solved via advertising either, right? But that is, to me, like the simplest way to kind of say what they do. But agencies can also provide, and again, when we talk about strategy, right? I mean, you're also working through all of that. So when we talk about advertising, the only thing that the consumer sees is the actual ad or piece of whatever you want to call it at this point, right? Because I say an ad, but it's not necessarily always an ad. They only see whatever is the end result, but there's so much that goes on behind that too. Agencies, used to also do buy media and place media, and that's not really, now there's big like media agencies instead that have taken that over. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, that definitely does. I think it's the best way to put it is that sort of like they're solving a problem, and I know that sounds broad, but it kind of like that's kind of the point, and it's like you said, it's the idea of like all we see is that like TV commercial. And before I had started studying advertising, I was just like kind of probably just assumed like if I see like a Kraft ad, it's like Kraft just did that on their own, and that's it. And just thinking like there's so much stuff that there's research that goes behind it. There's a reason that there's so much competition in advertising, because agencies are competing for the business of the clients. And I guess going into like that creative agency and how we're saying that there's so many steps behind it, like what are the different job roles within a creative agency, like kind of typically, and like how does that sort of hierarchy work, and how do they interact with each other?
So I
guess you can explain what you did also in that.
Yeah, I mean, in any given agency, you're going to have like the chief, like a CEO of the agency, right? Somebody that's like running the agency, and then underneath there, I mean, in some sort of structure. And again, like think that agencies vary so much now, and they have so many different structural roles. But typically, you'll have somebody that's the creative lead at an agency. You'd have somebody that's probably more of your account management role at an agency, account management lead. You'd have somebody that's more of your strategy lead at an agency also. But then there's also, some of that could be the head of production. And especially nowadays, because so much production is done in-house in agencies. And when I say in-house, it's because of things that can just be done so quickly, right? Versus, just going out and shooting a commercial. But there's so much stuff that can just be optimized and done in-house, especially when it comes to all sorts of social and things like that, right? And then in an agency, you could be structured as in groups, right? There's a creative group. There's a group over here. I'm not going to say a creative group, but a group over here, and they're working on, let's say, brands A, B, and C. A group over here, and they're working on brands, D, E, and F, et cetera, et cetera. And usually, you would have specific account people and creative people and strategists that are kind of all assigned to that. And within there, you'll have a creative director. The structure for that creative directors, and then going down from there, whether it's associate creative directors, senior art directors, and et cetera, et cetera. And the same, that level will go the same way on the brand side. On the account management side. So for me, when I left, I was a creative director, and you have a group of people that you're working under you. You have account people that you're sort of partnering with. You have specific brands that you work with. But in other agencies now, they can also have it where you may kind of have these groups, but then you kind of share everybody. There's a lot of that happens also, but it really depends on the structure of the agency at this point. And I just think that they're all just so very different. It's not like a traditional model anymore of how any of them are run.
Yeah, definitely. And that makes sense that obviously every agency is going to be different. I feel like the best way to sort of, if we're trying to explain these different kind of job roles, is if you kind of walk through a sort of start to finish of like, let's say you have a client, like an ad agency has X client. Client approaches the ad agency and being like, we have this problem we want you to solve. Like, what does it look like from that point to the point of it's on TV and it's an ad? Which obviously there's a lot, but I think this helps in sort of building out that in people's minds how much there is there.
Sure. So, let's take, like, for instance, I worked on Uncrustables, for Smuckers. So the client, right, again, like marketing, like the client has some sort of problem, right? Or there's something, whether they're not selling well, or they, want to, the clients, the thing is, clients not sure really what it is. They have like a marketing problem, right? Something that's keeping them up at night. And then the agency kind of has to figure out, okay, well, that's a marketing problem. But you see, what we're doing is we're doing advertising for consumers. So now we have to turn that into, how is your marketing problem? How do we make that into a consumer problem, something that we can solve? So the first thing is they'll be working with the account people, right? And the account managers, and sort of, having whatever conversation they're having. And then from there, they'd be working with strategists to sort of, do consumer research, because the client, yes, they'll have the research that they have, but it might be very brand focused. It might be somewhat consumer focused, but not the consumer focused or the qualitative sort of data that you'd want to get. So there could be a lot of focus groups, things like that. So eventually, like, and a higher level creative person would probably be brought in at that particular time too, to sort of discuss the overall strategic direction of maybe of where things are going to go. A client can also come in and just be like, oh, we want to do, a spot for, the Super Bowl. And I mean that, and then you kind of like back into something like that. Right. So then once you have worked all that out, and the strategist works on some sort of briefing for a creative team, that's exactly what they do. They brief a creative team. And then the creatives have to, work on, come up with whatever the advertising, and I'm doing like quotes around advertising because it might not just be like an ad. You don't know, maybe it's an experience, you're not really sure exactly what it is. And then, you're working on that. And then depending on what that is, then after that, you present it to a client. And then it would get produced in some way, shape, or form. And again, that production depends on what it is. If it's TV, you then work with directors, and you get that done. But, so much of that is changing now, too. The production process is so different because of how quickly everything can be done. And I do think it erodes a little bit of that it erodes the process. It erodes the craft. Let me put it that way. That's really what it is. If I can go into AI and have them, make me, a visual, then I don't really need to go and work with a photographer or do something like that. Like, and some of those times were like my favorite times. So I worked on a lot of food also when I was at Gray. I worked on Crisco. I worked on, like I said, I worked on a lot of Smuckers, Uncrustables. I'm trying to think of some of the other food brands. I worked on Healthy Choice for a really long time too. But working on and going and like working with food photographers and food stylists and doing all that kind of stuff was and prop stylists was just such a fun part of it, and again, that craft and bringing all that to life, and then bringing it back to the agency and then designing it and working with all that. Like, to me, that was just so much of what I loved. And but now it seems that a lot of that stuff is happening at a much faster pace, and a little bit of the craft, I think, is what's getting lost in all of the technological advances. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and lots of uncertainty now about what the world is going to look like, even in 5 years with that stuff, which can be a little bit like scary, but obviously a lot of it is just sort of out of the control of everybody, and it's kind of just how it ends up. But I think that's definitely, I think you explaining that kind of start to finish is important, because just seeing like who's touching it and like what different people are. I
mean, there's so many people that touch it before it goes out there. It really is, I mean, there's not, it's amazing, again, like we said, of what goes into something before anybody actually sees it.
Yeah. And I think another, if you're thinking of like the strategists and the copywriters / like there's like creative and then like account people, like what are like sort of stereotypes around like what kind of people are these? Because I think there's generally like these, like people are quite distinctly different among those kind of different disciplines.
So stereotypes. So I guess you'd say like your account managers is more of like what you would typically think of like your suits, right? So your account managers they're the representatives at the agency of what the client is, right? They want to always do things that are going to satisfy the client because they need that business, and you want to make sure that you keep that business, right? Your strategist is, to me, the person, I always say that they're one part like a foot in business and a foot on the creative side, because to be a strategist, you really have to, you're the voice of the consumer. You have to understand people. So in understanding people, yes, you have to be a people person, but you have to be, to me, like a lover of culture and really super curious, and to sort of to be up on trends, right? Because a lot of what happens in advertising is about trends, or how you're going to position something could also have to do with that as well. So to me, like a strategist is somebody who's really curious, but and they're also creative, but they also have a little bit of that business side to them as well. Creatives are, to me, also super curious, also up on trends, but also problem solvers, right? And maybe they didn't, or they're the ones that, were in school and they weren't sure, or they were, sometimes I like to think of them as dreamers or visionaries, or
eccentric, I feel like
eccentric, I guess, is a good word. Yeah, definitely. And maybe they had some sort of creative passion, right? Maybe they were always writing, someone who's always like looking to write a screenplay or writing a book or something, especially if you're a copywriter, right? You have to love to write. But so does a strategist too. So I think that they're, like, to me, they're really tied very closely together. So maybe you were the people used to think of you as maybe like the artist or something like that, but you didn't go into fine arts. You went into something else that was some sort of creative, that is still a creative career, and you get your satisfaction of, that artistic part in what you're doing creatively in advertising. Is that helpful?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's also important, because I think it puts a little bit of like context around how they are. Like it's interesting because it's a field that has like, it can have people who are much more like kind of business driven, and then it can have people who are extremely creative. And I think that's why it can be such like an exciting and interesting field, because there's so many differing like personalities working, and it's like you have so many different people working on one thing, and kind of keeping it on track can probably be difficult at times. But I think it's where some of the fun can be around that. And we're not going to dive into like media agency stuff, because I know that's like wasn't your expertise. And also I think the understanding the creative is more when people are asking like what's advertising, that's kind of what they're wondering. But I think at least knowing that, like, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I hear and from what I understand, it's like the creative side of an agency, if I'm thinking of an agency as like a part of it is the creative and a part of it is the media, kind of split apart. The creative is kind of enticing the client in, and then the media is driving the money from the client a lot of the time.
Yeah, and traditionally agencies were built on a model where you would make your money on the media that you spent, on the media that you bought. But when that model went away for ad agencies, and when media went to their own agencies, so revenue models had to change in agencies. at that point. But yes, so that is what you said, though, is correct.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's, and then, I mean, that's where I was my last summer in that media side, and I hope to be more on the creative side, but I think it was a good experience, and kind of seeing that once again, like, even within media, within my little, like, department that I was working, there are so many jobs. Like, there are so many jobs. Like, they had, like, 5 floors in the World Trade Center of just the media side of it. It's crazy how much there is there. And then transitioning into sort of you as a teacher and as a professor, and when you're in your experience of teaching students advertising and teaching them that creative side and just the whole, like, just learning about the industry, what do you think is the hardest part for students or, like, kind of new people to advertising to understand?
What is the hardest thing for them to understand? That advertising has to be entertaining. And I know it seems that it's an easy thing to understand, that advertising has to be entertaining and relevant in order for anyone to be interested in it. And it sounds like an easy concept. It sounds like, well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? But it's hard to do that. And that's what I think the biggest struggle is. You know, we can talk about it, but it's really hard to make that happen. And when I say relevant, I mean relevant to the brand that you're working on, relevant to the consumer, relevant to the audience, relevant to the strategy, all those kind of things. And again, it has to be entertaining, because nobody, you know, it's the quote of people don't read ads. People read things that are interesting to them, and sometimes it happens to be an ad. You know, nobody sits down to say, okay, let me sit down and, like, you know, watch some advertising, unless you're in advertising. But human beings just don't do that. So more media dollars are wasted on advertising that people don't see. And they see them, but they don't actually see them. Yeah. They just don't pay attention to them. So many.
But, like, even we've talked about in our classes, like, how, like, depending how loosely you define an advertisement, you see thousands and thousands a day that you just don't even realize. Like, even just seeing a logo on something, like, it is an advertisement in that's sorted. But it's like, if you're thinking of, like, the past, like, week, and it's like how much TV we watch and how much YouTube we watch and TikTok, it's like we see so many ads, and you're probably not going to remember one from the past week that you saw, unless it was something that really, like, it has to be a really good ad. It has to be entertaining, and something has to click to where your brain is going to switch on, and you're going to actually remember that.
Right. It has to make some sort of connection. I mean, that's why, like, you know, I love to ask that question in creative problem solving. I always ask, what was the last ad you remember seeing? And students just sit there and they can't. And sometimes they tell me about an ad that they saw at the last Super Bowl. It was like 6 months ago. That's what they remember. That's what's stuck in their brain. But it's true. It's hard to, okay, like, what really made an impact on you? Like, what did you like? What resonated with you enough to make you care, to make you stop what you were doing and actually care and pay attention to it?
Yeah, I think that's definitely, that's a big part. I think it's important, and I think it's I like hearing that from your perspective too, as obviously from the perspective of you're trying to get students to understand all this stuff. And there's a lot. Like, when I declared into advertising, I didn't realize how much there were. I didn't even know that there was media agencies and creative agencies. Right. I just was like, oh, advertising school, which I think is all it really takes to be interested in something. Right. And yeah, I think going into my next part. So as a creative person, as someone who's made a living off of being creative and just creativity, how do you stir up creativity? How do you get through a creative block? And, like, what does your sort of process look like? Just as someone who's been in the creative field for a while.
Well, for me, it's probably changed somewhat over the years, and I think that that's okay. You know, I mean, I try and, as I tell my students, I try and have a lot of interests in a lot of different things. And of course, my interests have changed over the years, as you get older, things, your interests do change. But for me, like if I was ever faced with something, right, like let's just say it's a creative brief, the first thing I always do is I just kind of do some, I want to call it like brainless thinking and scrolling and looking at stuff, whether it's advertising or design stuff or things about consumers and things that they're talking about. And so to me, it's just like in a way, like an information overload of just as much information I can. So if we're working on some sort of food thing, I would probably read food blogs. Maybe look at even restaurants. I would just read as much about the topic as I possibly could. And also look at all different sorts of advertising on that topic and things like that. So that's where I would start for like something specific like that. Otherwise, other things that I do to get through something creatively is do something else. Like if I do have some sort of block, I do something else. I do something that is keeping my mind going, but isn't related to the specific task at hand. So I'm a big New York Times crossword puzzle person, right? Or a lot of New York Times puzzle games. So I'm always doing that. It's like a thing for me. I have to solve them every single day. So there, and to me, it's about, again, it's, my mind is still doing something, but it's removed from that specific task at hand, which I feel like there's still some sort of connections being made in my brain, but they're happening while I'm focusing on something else. Because I feel like if you focus too much on one specific thing, and you're really trying to get something out of it, sometimes you can't. So I think it's best to walk away from it. Go to a yoga class sometimes too. Go for, those kind of things I really do think help. Watch something brainless. I like to watch really interesting things. I watch a lot of documentaries. I read a lot more. As I get older, I read a lot more nonfiction than I do fiction. And I just think, to me, knowledge is power. The more I know about just, not about a specific thing, but just about things in general, the more eventually connections I can make across different categories. And to me, that is what creativity is about, connecting things.
Yeah, and I think the idea of kind of creativity is like a muscle that you kind of, if you stop doing creative things and stop being curious, you're gonna lose it. And I think it's interesting. I know, even if you're just thinking it's unrelated, but meditation as a thing, it's you think of it is a thing that it's a muscle, and it's it doesn't feel the same as if you're doing bicep curls, your biceps get stronger. But it's if you meditate, you're gonna get better at it. And it's just like anything, it's you get better at it. But I think it's obviously interesting because it's not like there's one set way to be creative. And I think that's what also makes it interesting and why some people can be so valuable in the industry, is because some people just have their own methods and you can't copy it. You need to be that kind of person. Right.
It's everyone's creative process might be a little bit different. And that's 100%. And that's one thing that I try and stress in my classes. I try and in creative problem solving, here's a way to go about it, but that might not work for you, right? You have to figure out what that process is for you, and everyone's process may be a little bit different. We may all hit the same roadblocks and stuff like that, but I do believe that to be truly creative, and you do have to feed your mind. You have to be you can't go out there and talk to people in terms of communicate with people if you don't have things that are up in your brain. Traveling to me, it's another thing too. I just getting more out there in the world and seeing how other people see the world. It just brings a different, fresh perspective on it, and that's what I'd like to. I like to see fresh perspectives and different perspectives. So maybe I'm reading one thing, but I'll always look at another opinion on it, or try to see another opinion on it, even if I don't like the opinion.
Yeah, I think the idea of just how everybody kind of approaches it differently is so interesting. And I think this is why I sort of thought of this question, and I've never really asked you this, but like, if you're thinking of like, so if an ad agency is trying to find the right person for whatever role that is, like, what kind of, like, are they asking like very weird or unique interview questions to find these kind of, like, how are ad agencies finding the right people? Like, what are they asking in order to find the right person?
You mean how are ad agencies hiring people?
Yeah.
Or how are brand clients hiring agencies?
I was thinking more ad agencies finding the right people, but I guess it could go for both. Like, just like, if there's ever, like, even in your own experience, like, just interviewing, like, are interviews or even just client pitches, is it very strange in the questioning that they'll have and trying to find the right person?
I think agencies know, and brand and clients know, yeah, what could be the right fit. I mean, like, yeah, when you're doing a new business pitch, you are like putting yourself out there. And yeah, I mean, a client may be working with 4 or 5 different agencies, and you'll see what's going to win for you, and there definitely is a thing about fit. And I think that that's very true when it comes to agencies hiring people too. Do you want to work at an agency that, the culture at one agency might be really different than a culture at another agency. And, I think part of it is, first of all, it's going to be that first process of getting your resume through the door. Or if it comes to the creative side, like, your book and your portfolio, right? So just how just like consumers see a lot of stuff, so do creative recruiters. So you do have to have something that's going to get their attention, right? And then I think it's a matter of what kind of interests you have, and it's talking to whoever maybe you're going to be working with. You are going to interview with that person. My boss that hired me in my first job said to me, when I hire people, I think about, do I want to sit on a plane next to them for 6 hours? Because that's how long it took to fly from New York to LA. And we were always flying to LA for, production at that time. And if the answer was no, he wouldn't hire them.
I think that's a great way to put it. And I know this question was probably a little bit strange and hard to answer, just because as you were saying it, I was like, I'm sort of asking you, like, so how do they, like, what's that indescribable thing that makes people like, yes, this is the right person? Because I feel like it's kind of the similar thing of, like, you maybe don't always know why an advertisement works, but it's just like, it's something in your mind that just clicks. So obviously maybe it's a little bit hard, but I like the way that you put it. Like, even just like, it's a lot of it is just comes down to fit, and it's an indescribable thing. That's why it can be difficult, and that's why there's turnover and agencies are losing clients and they're switching over and stuff like that.
Well, like, for instance, however many years ago, Droga 5 had gotten Ragu as one of their brands, and they did a campaign that was so out of the ordinary for Ragu, and it was all about, like, when like after a really hard day, and it was like it wasn't towards kids, but it was really about kids. And after your kid has had a long day, like, there was this whole song about, like, Ragu is, and it was really funny, and it was so different than anything they had ever done, and they had gotten a lot of press about it, and then Ragu didn't want to do those ads anymore, so Droga was like, okay, well then we don't want to, we are declining you, because they didn't want to have to go and do shitty advertising. Yeah. Because there's some clients that just want what they want, and they don't want anything new and different.
Yeah. I think moving towards, like, the end of this, like, final little parts, if you're thinking of your whole career, of everything that you've worked in, because there's so many different things, like, if you had to place out, like, a piece or two that you're most proud of, or even just a time that you enjoyed most in industry, which I'm sure there's a lot of different potential
there
things.
Is. It's really sort of, the beginning, like when I first started on Burger King, was such a special time, and we had such a great group of people that we worked with, and I was young, I'm in my early 20s. I'm living in Manhattan. It was like I had like the dream of what I always wanted. My when I was younger, I always wanted to live in Manhattan, work in advertising, and I was doing all that. I was working a lot, but I didn't care. Like the people that I worked with, we did everything. We hung out on the weekends. We hung out Thursday night. Well, Thursday night was always a big night. We went out together. We worked together. We did everything together, and that was such a super super fun time. As I always said, I was living my best life. And then, but also my time at Gray and the people that I worked with, we were Buzz Gray, like we were all different groups, and Buzz was our group. And Robert Scholar and Maureen Moldari were our, head. Robert was the executive creative director, and Maureen was the head account person. We had such a special group there too, and we all worked together for a really long time. And I love that. And I love the people I worked with there, and I'm still very friendly with a lot of them. And even if some of it is just kind of on social media sometimes, But it was, it was like a family, and that's really what it becomes because you're spending so much time with these people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's just hearing that is makes me excited for the industry. I think it's so. Because, like we talked about, it's so many different types of people. It's so many different, people will come from a completely different discipline and then find out that they're well suited for advertising.
Yeah, 100%.
It's awesome, and I think that encapsulates kind of why I'm sure one of the big reasons why you enjoyed being in advertising so much.
Yeah, it was great. We had it's so much fun. The most fun you could have at work, I felt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's what everybody wants to find a career that they feel excited to do, and you're not dreading going to work every day, or at least you can tolerate.
Right.
And then moving into my final couple questions. So the themes around this podcast that I originally started. So I had started this from, it was Steve Jobs, his Stanford the commencement speech that he gave, and he has this line where basically he's like, whenever I have to make a decision, I just think I'll be dead soon, and that's why I named the podcast Dead Soon. So the themes around this podcast I kind of center around happiness and just kind of deeper topics. So I have 3 questions for you. My first one is, what part of your life currently brings you the most happiness or fulfillment?
Oh, jeez.
And I never prepare. I don't prepare anyone for the final question, so.
I mean, it has to be it is. I mean, when you say that, the first thing I think about are my kids, right? And my family. Seeing where they're going to be. And all my sons are 19, 20, and 23. And I love who they are now as, I'm going to say, grown-ups, right? I loved who they were as children. I'd never go back to those times, though. I never want to do that again. But I love who they are as the adults that they are now, and having dinners with them, and going to Italy with them and drinking Negronis with them, or all those kind of things. So, and my husband and I, and doing all that with them, that definitely is what brings me, is most fulfilling, is seeing them grow up into good humans. They're not always good humans, but hoping that's, for the most part they are, but, really seeing that and always keeping my fingers crossed that it's all going to work out for all of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a beautiful answer. I think that's awesome. And it shows, it shows into you more, which I think is awesome. My next one is, what do you do when you're in a mental slump? What helps you move through that? Because obviously everybody has ups and downs. So what helps you?
A mental slump. So elaborate on that more. Just when I can't do anything more. Do you mean a mental slump more depressed, or just
more so I think of it for myself, if I'm feeling uncertain about anything or I'm unhappy about anything, for me it always tends to be some sort of exercise helps me, sort of helps me if I'm like, I don't know what I can't do anything. I just need to do this, and it'll always help me. It can be just like, and like for me, it's just like exercise and take a shower, and I'll always end up feeling better.
Let's think about that for a second. I mean, if I'm at the point that like I just can't take any more of something, I would probably go and watch something brainless. If I'm like in like a mental slump, I'm probably not up for like yoga or Pilates either. I don't think I really am. I would probably go and do, and that's when I watch like brainless TV. You know, like things that like I just don't have to think too much on, like a stupid movie, you know, that isn't gonna.
No documentaries.
No documentaries at that point. No. Something like that. Or you know what I'll do? I'll go hang out with my sister. I'll go hang out with my sister and her kids because she has a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old, and they're always a lot of fun.
It's definitely like that. Thinking of it, like kids are so like it's so like you can take your mind off of anything just because seeing how like happy they are and how like unconcerned they are. It's like it can be inspiring, just like seeing little kids be happy. And
that's probably the best thing. I mean, again, like because something when you first asked, I'm like thinking of me like at night when like I can't take something anymore, and that's when I'm going to go do that. But like there'll be like on a weekend or something like that, or sometime where I'm just like ugh, and then I'll just go hang out with them. And again, like like I said, they're fun.
It gets you in the moment.
Yeah, they ask like good questions, or my niece is really bossy though too, even though she's 2, but she's super super bossy.
Yeah, I think that's awesome because I think also, I mean, a part of the idea of Dead Soon is the idea of being present, which is definitely something that I've been working on. I think is so important. And then if we're ending off on this final question, here it is. So if you could craft a single message to be given to someone, every single person, right as they turn 18, so like basically a piece of sort of life advice to give to everybody as soon as it hits their 18th birthday, what would that piece of advice be?
I know the first thing that's going to come to my mind is don't drink and drive.
That's good advice.
I mean, seriously, like don't and 18 because not that you're old enough to drink when you're not old enough to drink right at 18. But I do think of that because it could be such a mistake that you can make that can just have such devastating effects on your life or somebody else's life or something like that, So that's one piece of advice, but do I get to do a second one too?
Yeah, sure.
You're not going to figure it all out in the next 4 years, is what I would say too. And that's okay. And it's okay. It's okay not to know what you want to do for the rest of your life at 18. Yeah. And I think that there's so much pressure on that. And I think that's really unfortunate. And I get that it's our society. Like I wish I could change that. I can't, but it's okay not to know. It's okay to, I also wish that our society was maybe more forgiving on everybody go and take 2 years and then come back.
Yeah, there's so much pressure. It really, even if I'm thinking societal pressure, but then for myself, there's this self-inflicted pressure to be I need to have this figured out.
Yeah.
But it's knowing that nobody really figures it out.
And it's okay to fail. It's okay to fail. It's okay to fail class. It's okay to switch your major. It is okay. You
don't settle for something.
Yeah.
Especially, in college, you don't want to settle for a major that you don't like just because you've done 3 semesters of it. You could
right.
You can 90% of the time you can make it work, and especially if you have an advisor that cares, it can help a lot.
Right. And if somebody tells you can't, go find somebody else to tell you that it can. Because somebody you'll find if you keep going around with enough people, you'll find somebody else that will help you to figure it out.
Yeah, well, I think that's awesome, and that's all I have. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say or ask, or don't want to put you on the spot, but that's all I had written down.
I don't know if I have
and we've
anything
done
else.
Pretty much exactly an hour.
Yeah. I think this is great that you're doing this. Thank you for having me.
Of course.
I think, I think you're going to do really great. I can always tell, like, when students are, they're going to do really well, like, out there in the real world, and I think you will.
Thank you.
So, but I'm honored that you wanted to have me on here.
Yeah, of course. I was very excited. And this feels like the way that we're saying this is the last time we're going to see each other, but I will still be around, and I'm in this building all the time, so it is awesome.
And I'll see you at graduation and all that kind of stuff too. Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, definitely, I appreciate it, and yeah, that's been I think this is the 18th episode already. Right. And yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, Trevor.
Of course.
Okay.